Okay, so we're resuming our conversation. Daniel Finca here from the Camels with Hammer Show with Jerry DeWitt, former clergy, former Christian clergy who is now exploring what it means to be a preacher who is an atheist. And so at the end of the last segment, we Jerry was talking about how in the South there's sometimes an alienation from or a perception that mainstream atheist leaders and famous authors kind of represent a foreign culture and even a condescending one to Southern culture, and so he's going to pick up with that thought.
Yeah. So, um, obviously, I don't hold any hard feelings or resentment towards those that have led the charge thus far. I'm very much in love with the Four Horsemen, but at the same time, it's obvious. It's not just obvious to me, but it's obvious to people outside of the movement who interview me or come across me and instantly draw a comparison between me and the Ivy Leaguers. That it isn't always everyday language. I mean, I truly consider myself to be an everyday person, and that's not insulting to say those other people aren't. We're probably all trying to be more like them, but at the same time, we have something to offer, and not just to offer the movement as a whole. That's probably too much of a stretch. But what we have to offer is to people like us in the Deep South or within a more Southern culture. And so, it's always more relatable whenever you're relating to people that you're more related to.
Yeah, and I think there's something very elitist about traditional atheism, and a lot of atheists are elitist, and they write off the need to have atheist community at all or talk about atheism because there's a condescension to the ordinary person. And so you'll have a lot of well-educated scientists and philosophers and all sorts of academics, or people who are very well off financially, and they take a view that, well, religion is for the ordinary people, and we know better, and
Right.
and they have an assumption then. So I always find that when they're criticizing outspoken atheism, they almost see it as one of the elite going and picking on ordinary people when they
Right.
criticize religion.
Right.
And what I find so interesting is what I think they miss is that Dawkins has reached out to the very ordinary atheists who
Yeah.
exist all over the world, who feel isolated. They're not living in an ivory tower with other atheists. They feel alone in their atheism, and they feel like an outcast for their atheism. And there's a whole consciousness about that of raising the identity of ordinary atheists to know that they're not alone, and that they're normal, and that
Right.
they even have the intellectual community very largely on their side, even though
Absolutely.
the intellectual community won't explicitly support them. And so
That's right.
what I yeah we're in a stage now where if we really are going to be a movement that is not elitist and is for everybody, it's going to need our voices that come from other demographics. Yeah, it's a really
I
important point.
I completely agree. Two quick issues there. One is that I've spent quality time with Richard Dawkins. I know that Richard Dawkins is a compassionate person.
Yeah.
Um, from our perspective, because he's from across the pond, obviously his mannerisms are different than ours. His idioms that he uses are different than ours, and that can be a distraction when we're so used to one particular personality type. But
Hmm.
I know for a fact from my experience, sitting in the room with him, sitting on the couch next to him, and him hearing my story and watching his facial expressions, and knowing, not just from his contribution to the Clergy Project, but his contribution in conversations to me personally, that he is the caring person, and that he's not an elitist, and that he doesn't see himself as above or beyond, and is reaching out as far and wide as he can. At the same time, his personality is going to limit the people he can talk to, just like my personality is going to limit the people that I can talk to. And
Right.
so the winning strategy is not to mimic any one single archetype, but instead to say there are no templates, and everyone is reaching out to everyone that they can. You know, I don't have any illusions of moving to the Northeast and them saying, Jerry, you're such an awesome preacher. We're just going to give you a doctorate's degree in communication, and you can teach us all how to talk to people. I
Right.
know that's not going to happen, and it shouldn't happen. But in Louisiana, where my work is primarily focused, I do fit in very well, and I can be effective. And so as I've said from the very beginning, everybody should be doing everything they can because
Yeah.
it's going to reach or help someone.
Now, I think personally, I am very, very passionate about helping people overcome false religious beliefs. And as a former believer, I don't feel like it's well, there's two things. I don't feel like it's an obnoxious thing to challenge someone's beliefs because I don't feel like it's a rude thing or something that's upsetting because to me personally, I'm grateful that there were people who challenged my beliefs and I wound up changing my mind
Sure.
and 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 so I having gone through a deconversion process, I don't tend to look at believers as delicate flowers who can't have their that they
Right.
can't have their worldview messed with. And I'm also concerned because I know so much of the struggle that they're going through to reconcile their beliefs with their values and with all these contradictions. And I really have a heart for the way that they may be missing out on things in life because of
Right.
false beliefs. And so I'm a proponent of what I would call evangelical atheism, and that's the other thing. The evangelicals trained me to think, in
In an
terms
evangelical way,
of
sure.
an evangelical way, and to try and change others' minds about religion, and to treat this as a matter for cognitive discussion. And so I'm wondering your thoughts on whether or not, like, how you feel about deconverting people or making that a part of what you're doing. Do you really see that as one of your goals to help people out of religion, or is it more that you want to help the people who already want out but are like you were in that phase of not knowing how to get out? Or is your goal just to provide secular community and destigmatize atheism? Like, how would you rank these goals, and what's important to you?
Yeah. Actually, for me, I would rank them um, in the reverse order of how you laid out the argument. As far as me, number one would be community. Would simply be building secular community. And all of this ties into the fact that I'm a horrible evangelist. I was a horrible Christian evangelist. I would be hired to come, to hold revival services, and the pastor who hires you to do that, what he's wanting to do is and giving him the benefit of the doubt, he's wanting to build the kingdom of God. Being a little bit more realistic and materialistic, he's wanting to grow his church. And so you're hired as the hired gun to come in, the new face, the new voice, and build the church by convincing people to come to Christ and join that church. And I was horrible at it. I'm a horrible salesman.
Mm.
My heart was always a pastor's heart. I always wanted to meet people where they were at and help make their life better any way I could. Even if, and here's the part that sometimes atheists struggle to understand, make those lives better, even if it's just for a moment, even if it's just during the course of the service, even if it's almost nothing more than an emotional distraction and something that's uplifting just to make life more pleasant. We hope that it reaches further into people's lives than that, but if that's all it does, then that was a moment that you've given them almost as a gift. So number one, secular communities. Number two would be, once again, this pastor's heart, just meeting people where they're at. Just simply, if they're in transition, then trying to figure out how can we help them best while they're in transition. If they've already made the transition and they're trying to deal with the effects, then how can we do that? Then lastly, I would see myself more evangelical as trying to help people out of their religion But that really is lowest on my list, and I know that probably disappoints a whole lot of secular people, and I don't know if it would excite religious people to know that about me or not. But and that's just a personality thing. And honestly, the only there's three issues that makes me interested in bringing someone out of their religion: what they do in the voting booth, how they treat their children, and how their life is diminished by their religious beliefs, what you just brought up. You know, I've got people that I love dearly that if I could somehow help them be less religious so that they could explore their own individuality and truly explore life and reality, then I would very gladly do that. But most likely they're going to have to approach me for me to do that for them.
Yeah. And what do you think about? I had two questions. What do you think about, since you were just very recently a Christian,
Right.
what do you think atheists, especially those who've been out a while or have never been believers, what do you think that they don't get, that you are more sympathetic or empathetic to believers about?
Just how complicated all this crap is. You know, that it really is complicated. Like with the Clergy Project, what I've enjoyed doing, and let me back up and talk about one thing real quick. I love and I'm very proud of the title, the first graduate of the Clergy Project. But the whole thing's a misnomer, you know, and it gets us into trouble sometimes because there's no program, you know, that there's no curriculum, there's no test. All it simply means was I was a non-believing minister when I came into the program. Not only did I leave the ministry, but I left it public. That's really all that means. And there's only been a couple of us that's done that in that particular order, and thus got the slang term graduate. So that's important, and the Clergy Project Board really wants to make sure that starts getting out there. But what I now say as I travel across the country is I don't think I'm the answer, and I know I don't have the answer, but I feel like I'm part of the question, and I feel like this is far more complicated than lifelong atheists are able to truly appreciate. You know, the question that comes up is people will say, okay, well, you're up here defending this minister who doesn't believe but is still in the ministry. Isn't that lying? Well, yeah, duh. Yeah, of course it's lying. Whoever said it wasn't lying? But now we're talking about different degrees of falsehood. Now we're talking about different degrees of deception. And what is he saying versus what he's supposed to say? And, you know, there's all of these complications. And to what degree is lying necessary to take care of your family, to take care of your loved ones, to keep hospitalization, to keep your children in college, to pay your mortgage? So all of this gets very complicated, and that's what I think maybe sometimes the lifelong atheist isn't able to truly appreciate. You know, they'll say things
Right.
like, "Well, I've got a Darwin fish on my car, and nobody's ever scratched the car." Yeah, well, where do you live? You know, I mean, where do you park your car? On a university campus? Yeah, okay, that's probably true. You know, so the second thing is also understanding the difference in personality. Almost without exception, the person who says, I don't get it, I don't see why you need community, I don't see why, you know, you need to do anything that even resembles religion, I can almost guarantee you that is a particular personality type. And that's okay. And they should go and do the things that that particular personality type enjoys and can contribute. But that doesn't mean everybody's going to be that way.
Yeah. You know, I recently started a philosophical advice column where I'm trying to answer people's questions from a philosophical perspective. And one of the first questions I answered was someone who's going to be a camp counselor and wanted to know, and they're on the verge of, they might not believe, and so they wondered what I would say to do. Yeah. And I was in this position of, like, I first almost lost my faith right before becoming a Christian camp counselor for a summer, my second summer at a Christian camp, and I just scrambled to try and believe again in time. Sure. And so I had a little taste of this, and my advice was, you know, like, I felt terrible afterwards After I deconverted, I felt like all the efforts I put into evangelizing was, you know, all for the falsehood, and I advanced the wrong cause with my whole life. But what I realized, and that was very, very, I mean, and I had to deal with that at 21, let alone much older.
Right.
So that's such a painful feeling to feel like you've been working in the wrong direction on so many important things. But
Right.
what I did realize as a consolation is that you still are providing a number of non-cognitive goods for people,
Sure.
and you're still providing helpful counseling in a number of other areas, and often, you know, you're still helping people think in certain kinds of categories, even if they weren't literally the right ones. And and what I realized was I'm okay with where I promoted the values I still have. And I said to him, in this article, I said, figure out in advance, right now, figure out what values you most are committed to and believe in
That's
that would
exactly right.
transcend whether you're a believer or not. That you could feel good you promoted those values. And if for the time being you're going to convey those values through the available means of the Christian tradition and symbols, at
Right.
least you're promoting the values you will not feel bad about having promoted. And I get, is that what other advice, or is that what your approach was, and what other advice would you give someone who's out there right now struggling with this?
I would second everything that you just said. It's it's difficult without having been there, and you've been there, to fully appreciate everything else that goes on besides promoting doctrine.
Right.
There's just a lot of extracurricular benefits, that are going on that people probably have a hard time appreciating. Just the just the fact that you're integrated into this community, and how each one's success or failures plays off of the lives of each other's success or failures. All of that is terribly, terribly important, and that's just one of the numerous reasons why you can't just suddenly rip yourself away from it. You've got obligations to people. You know, and so I think that's wonderful advice. The other thing that I say to people is, if you can, figure out in advance how public you think you're going to need to be in order for your conscience to feel clear, to feel clean. There's some ministers that, when they finally get free, they're never even going to, they'll probably never even go to the movies again, because they're not going to be even associated with being in a crowd. They're just burnt out, they're done. But then there's other people that they know they're going to have a public life, that they're going to try to, be an activist or do something. Even understanding what your life's goals are can greatly affect your strategy of how you're going to come out, of when you're going to come out, and why you should come out. So all of those things are very important. And the other thing that I say to them is, don't think that there's any one single template that has to be followed. There's no one way to do this. Every single life is filled with its own responsibilities. Literally, before you and I got on this call the first time, I had just gotten off the phone with someone and just got through telling them this. This is a minister from California. And I said, you've got to understand, you feel a weight of obligation. See, this whole word religion is so stinking tricky, because we think a person sits in the congregation and they feel this religious pressure to live up to this expectation. But atheists do it too. It's just part of the human nature. You go online and you see these stories, and you see this crazy guy in the South, Jerry DeWitt, he used to be a preacher, and he's come out, and suddenly you start feeling this little twinge of guilt, and this wave of responsibility or expectation that now you've got to come out the same way, and you've got to do something. And that's what I call religion. I think
Mm.
that's a byproduct of a religious mindset. So I told this guy, I said, you've got to take your life and your responsibilities. You've got to make those your priorities. So I tell people, slow down, take your time. Disbelief isn't going anywhere. Atheism's not going anywhere. You've got time to work your way through these things.
Yeah, that's great. And who is the book for? Hope After
Ah,
Faith.
yeah. that's an excellent question. You know, I this is going to sound like I'm trying to sell books, and of course I am. But um, you know, I hope there's a little something for everybody. I feel like regardless of who reads it, they're going to go behind the scenes of a very tortured Pentecostal minister's life. You're going to be in the background, and you're going to know by the time you get through the book, you're going to know exactly what it's like to have been at least me as a Pentecostal minister. And the reason I think that's important, the reason I think it can help everybody to some degree, is because it's one of those situations where unless you've been there, you don't understand. I make the joke all the time that I was telling the group in Austin that it took me 25 years, to figure this out, and somebody in the audience yelled out, "You're a slow learner," And first, that probably is true, but second, you probably can't appreciate how hard it is to accept some of these facts until you've walked in those shoes. And the book literally, from page one, puts you in my shoes, in the shoes of my wife and my family, and you literally walk with us through every stage of the change and why each stage was so life altering and life damaging. So you go through this for 25 years. So I think it's a good read. Ethan Brown, my co-writer, is absolutely fabulous. The man was truly a gift into my life, and so I have to give so much of the credit to him as well. But I would love for the lifelong atheist to read it and maybe come back, with a little more compassion for us silly people who didn't suddenly realize there was no God in the fourth grade, like so many of them, claim to have done. Oh, I got it in Sunday school whenever I was 8 years old. I figured this out. Okay, great, wonderful. What are you doing? And I really hope it reaches people in the South. I really hope that it reaches fellow Pentecostals. As a matter of fact, the person I was on the phone with that I just mentioned was a fellow ex-Pentecostal, and there's not a whole lot of us. There's not nearly as many of us as there is of other ex-denominations. So I hope it reaches everybody.
That's great. One thing I loved about there were two things I hugely resonated with when I first heard you. I just want to raise for you to discuss. Sure. One of them was I think both of you and I had the same experience of feeling like we went through identity suicide. I love the way you framed that at your AEA talk. I think that was because that was exactly what it was, that everything I am and have built my life around, like when you're that religious, especially with fundamentalist Christianity, it's that there's no part of your life that's not run through your faith. You don't watch movies except through your faith. You don't have friends disconnected from your faith. It really you have to reassess and realign everything. And that's so traumatic, and we used to be completely alone in that. There were when I was, at least for me, there was no atheist internet. There were no atheist role models. It was very alone, and a couple of other disbelieving undergrads deconverting with me. And it was dangerous for me, I think, in some ways. It was harmful to me. And I think my life is worse for that. And so that's why it's so wonderful we're putting in this infrastructure to catch people and help them. And so many people outside the community are so lacking in empathy for why and this just really bothers me, because they're like, well, why do you need to go help, why do you need to go talk about this, and why do you need to set up a recovery from religion foundation? Right. You want to pull people out of their faiths, and it's like, no, there are people suffering, and the structure of things in this culture alienate them on purpose. They marginalize everything in their power to do that. Michael Medved was talking to Sarah Moorhead, and the executive director of the Recovery from Religion Foundation right now, and he said to her, well, why do you need this organization when there's room for doubters in the church? We love the sinners. It was like yes, you have to understand yourself as a sinner for being a doubter, right? And the doubt can only be tolerated in this closed way. Like, it can't ever be genuine rebuke and challenge and rejection.
Right.
There's no place for that. They want to remove any place for us. And so that identity suicide, and what I love, the two things that resonated were, you stressed something I stress, and it's that what you found was your identity you thought had to be your faith, but the deeper identity was your commitment to people, right? It was your commitment where you, from the beginning, couldn't handle this doctrine of hell, and you were deeply a humanist all along. And
Right.
for me, it was a matter of I was deeply committed to an ethics of truth and integrity and honesty, and that was what carried me. And you find that there is a deeper identity beneath the faith, even when that's all you can see at first as your whole identity. And
Right.
the other thing that really struck me is that you and I, like, we have dramatic deconversions, and we grew up in traditions that were built on the dramatic conversion.
Yes.
And growing up, I never had a dramatic conversion story. Like, but I had to give a testimony. It'd always be like, my parents are divorced, and that's hard. So now I've
Right.
learned to trust Jesus. But I didn't have or like my brother's conversion story was mine. And so I found it so interesting that as an evangelical, there's a whole structure of logic of being the one who has a dramatic transformation.
Right.
I think it's interesting how that sets us up to become deconverts, because we have this structure of a narrative. And listening to you talk, you spoke in that kind of a narrative. I once was lost, and now I'm found, in a way.
Sure.
I just bring up these observations for your thoughts on them.
Yeah, I love that, and I love the fact that you bring up the story, because that relates directly back to two very important issues, both our desire to create secular services and all of the organizations that that are doing such wonderful work within the movement. People far more intelligent than I, far more studied than I, could give a much better explanation of why humans are so in love with storytelling. But there's no doubt it is an extremely important part of our life. You can't even watch a 30-second commercial without them telling you a story. The commercials that work tell you a story in 30 seconds. And you have to love the characters within 30 seconds, or you're not even gonna, buy a car that you don't know the story for. And so, what I see going on is the organizations that exist within the secular movement, say whether it's Catherine who's running the Clergy Project, or Sarah who's running Recover from Religion, or like whether it's Del Rey's newest adventure with the Secular Therapist Project. What makes all of those organizations important is that people have similar stories. Yeah, you could go sit on a pew somewhere and the pastor could tell you it's okay to be a doubter, but he's also going to be telling you a story that says you've got to get over it. Or this is, you'll become a better person by getting over your doubting, to where you sit with Recovering from Religion or the Clergy Project or the Secular Therapist, or any of these other wonderful groups, and you're sharing similar stories and you're all on the same level. And it's not that you've got to get better or get past it or overcome it. You actually just share it together. Our idea of creating secular services is creating another medium where we can tell stories, where we can tell the story of life, the pleasure of living, the joy of relationships, the value of humanity through this other medium called a service. And so all of these things tie in together very well. And I appreciate you, setting that up for me.
Great. Do you think there's any virtue in particular Christians do well that atheists would do well to learn from? And have you experienced from atheists any particular virtue that you think believers need to learn from?
Oh, two come to mind right off the bat. Number one, the secular movement needs to learn how to raise money the same way the religious tables do. And it's not so much raise it, because they can raise it. Whether it's a bombing in Boston, or a tornado in Oklahoma, atheists are charitable people. By and large, the majority of them consider themselves to be humanists, and they will give the money. They're very, very, very generous that way. But it's in the day-to-day operations where, once again, we're like, that's too much like church, passing the plate. Well, okay, well, set a can by the door. Well, one time I went to a church, I had a can by the door. So like, well, look, if you don't want to give up your damn money, just say so. Just stop blaming it on religion. If you're, if you're selfish, say you're selfish. Whatever. It's fine. Let's don't limit what we're able to do. And so that would be a big thing. That would be important. But then the thing that obviously the church world, you've got the obvious things like critical thinking and things like that. But trying to come at it from a total different direction, the acceptance of diversity would be a wonderful thing for religious people to truly take out of the secular movement. It's wonderful to go to a convention, to go to a meetup, and to know that everybody, even if something instinctual in them is opposed to something a little different about somebody, it's so obvious that everyone is truly trying to accept everyone's individual makeup, and I dearly love that. And the reason I emphasize that is because most Christianity is trying nowadays to teach you to love your neighbor as yourself, but they don't ever teach you how to love yourself, so thus your neighbor gets the shaft.
Mm. And it's funny. I love what you said about it's too much like church to raise money, because I saw a video that argued that like vloggers and bloggers shouldn't ever ask for money because that's what preachers do. And it was just like, like we're never gonna make money. Like that's against there's this ethos that being paid to help people with their philosophy and their like the pastoral needs of people, that there's something unseemly about being paid for those sorts of things when they're very important to people, and they're as valuable service as anything else, and the people who provide them need education, they need to live, and it is a very frustrating thing. People think writers, artists, musicians, and philosophers and pastors don't deserve any money, and it's
and what it says without really meaning to say it. I'm going to give everyone the benefit of the doubt, but what it says to the blogger, from the blogger all the way to the philosopher, what it says to all of those people is your time isn't valuable.
Right.
That's what it says, is your time isn't valuable. You should give me your time, because that's what it comes down to. Whether you're blogging, whether you're pastoring, whether you're writing, no matter what you're doing, when you're giving into someone else's life, you're giving of your life. You're giving of your time to do that. And in our economy, the way that we express value is through the exchange of this little thing called money.
Yeah.
And in religion,
oh, we didn't pay the bills. And we might be out. Okay, so did we lose Jerry again? All right, we're gonna end here and then maybe do a last segment. Okay, great.